"Don't you touch him." Her voice barely reached above a whisper. Her hands were shaking. She hadn't eaten in 2 days, her shoes had holes in both soles, and she weighed maybe 110 pounds, soaking wet. But she stepped in front of that old man anyway, and they beat her for it. They beat her until she couldn't stand, until she couldn't breathe right, until the gravel beneath her cheek was warm with her own blood. What they didn't know, what nobody in Silver Creek, Montana knew yet, was that the man she protected had already made one phone call. If this story moves you, subscribe to this channel right now and follow every part until the end. Drop your city in the comments below. I want to see how far this story travels. She hadn't planned on being brave that night. Bravery in Emily Carter's experience was a luxury that belonged to people who had something left to lose. At 18 years old, Emily had already surrendered most of what other kids her age took for granted: a bedroom, a last name that meant something, a family that showed up. What she had instead was a worn gray backpack, a sleeping bag rated for 40 degrees that she used in temperatures half that, and a working knowledge of which dumpsters behind which restaurants in Silver Creek, Montana were worth checking after 10 o'clock at night. She was not stupid. Nobody who survives what Emily Carter survived gets to be stupid. She had been bounced through 7 foster homes by the time she turned 15, and in 5 of those 7 homes she had learned the same essential lesson taught in different voices with different hands, but always delivering the same message: you are not worth protecting. So she stopped expecting it. She stopped expecting kindness from strangers. She stopped expecting fairness from systems that were supposed to care. She stopped expecting warmth from the world in general, and Silver Creek, Montana in late November was more than happy to confirm that expectation every single morning when she woke up still cold, despite everything she did to stay warm. What she had instead of hope was routine. Routine kept her alive. Every evening around 7, she made her way behind the row of businesses along Route 9 and worked the recycling. Bottles were worth a nickel each at the Redemption Center, 2 blocks from the county line. On a good night, she could pull 60, sometimes 70 bottles from the bins behind the gas station, the pizza place, and the old roadside diner that locals called Patty's, even though nobody named Patty had worked there in 11 years. On a good night, that was $3.50. Enough for a gas station coffee and one of the pre-packaged sandwiches that nobody else wanted by closing time. On a bad night, she went to sleep hungry and didn't let herself think about it too long. November had been a lot of bad nights. She was behind Patty's diner. Her hands so cold inside her thin gloves that she could barely grip the bottles properly when she heard the bell above the front door jingle. It was just past 7:30. Most of the dinner crowd had already cleared out. She wasn't supposed to be visible this early. She preferred to wait until the last staff member left before she worked the bins out front, but she'd been cold all day, and her legs hurt from walking, and she'd convinced herself that Patty's back lot was safe enough. She pulled a plastic bag tighter around one hand, trying to generate heat, and kept working. That's when the motorcycle pulled in. She heard it before she saw it. A deep rolling sound that vibrated somewhere in her sternum, an old engine running heavy and sure. She stayed low, kept her head down. Motorcycles in Silver Creek weren't unusual. The town sat right off a stretch of highway, popular with riders during the warmer months. But this was November, which meant either the rider was local or the rider was stubborn. One glance around the corner of the dumpster told her the answer was both. The man who climbed off that old Harley Davidson was somewhere in his late 60s, broad through the shoulders, but moving with the slow, deliberate care of someone whose joints had accumulated too many miles and too many winters. His gray beard reached the center of his chest. His leather vest was dark and worn, covered in patches she couldn't read from this distance. He had a slight limp in his left leg that he didn't bother to hide or compensate for. He just walked with it like it was part of him, like it had been there so long, it had earned the right to stay. He tied his bandana tighter before pushing through the front door. Emily went back to the bottles. She wasn't paying attention to the diner. She was paying attention to her count. 43 bottles so far. Needed at least 50 to make it worth the walk to the Redemption Center in the morning. She didn't hear the truck pull in. She heard the doors. 3 of them slamming hard one after another in the way that young men slam car doors when they want the world to know they've arrived, like an announcement, like a warning, like a declaration that whatever space they were entering now belonged to them. She went still. Not because she knew what was coming. She didn't. Not yet. She went still because that sound, the sound of loud young men arriving somewhere at night, had taught her through experience to wait and see before she moved. She waited. She heard their voices through the thin wall of the diner, laughing first, then louder. Then the particular shift in register that happens when laughter tips over into something meaner, when humor becomes a vehicle for something else entirely. She heard one word clearly carried through the ventilation gap above the back door. Grandpa. Then laughter. Then something she couldn't make out. Then the sound of a chair scraping hard across a floor. Emily Carter had survived 17 foster placements, 4 group homes, and 2 years on the street by knowing when something was wrong before it fully announced itself. Her nervous system had been calibrated by hard experience into an instrument more accurate than any alarm system money could buy. Every signal in her body fired at once. Something is wrong in there. She set the bag of bottles down. She moved to the back door. She told herself she was just going to look, just see what was happening. She wasn't going to do anything. She wasn't going to get involved. Getting involved with things that weren't her business was how you ended up hurt, and she had been hurt enough. She pulled the door open 2 inches. What she saw through that 2-inch gap rearranged something inside her that had been arranged a certain way for a very long time. The old man, the biker, was still sitting at the counter. His food was in front of him. He hadn't finished eating. His coffee cup was still in his hand, and he was holding it with the particular steadiness of someone who was choosing not to show fear, someone who had decided that his hands were not going to shake in front of these 3 boys no matter what they said, and they were saying plenty. And the one doing most of the talking was maybe 22, 23, wearing a jacket that probably cost more than Emily had earned in the last 6 months of bottle collecting. His 2 friends flanked him on either side, one taller one, broader, both wearing the same expression, the one that says, "I don't have to do anything here, because my friend will do it for me, and I'll laugh regardless." "I'm talking to you, old man," the one in the expensive jacket was saying. He'd stepped up close, too close, the kind of close that was itself a form of assault. "That your bike outside, that piece of junk taking up 3 spaces. The old man set his coffee cup down slowly. "It's taking up 1 space, son." "Don't call me son." "Then don't call my bike a piece of junk." There was a half-second of silence, in which the diner seemed to contract around itself. The waitress behind the counter had gone very still. Her back half turned, her body communicating very clearly that she was going to stay out of this entirely. The 2 other customers in the place had found sudden, deep interest in their food. "You think you're funny," the kid in the jacket said. "I think you're drunk," the old man said simply. "And I think if you go home now, neither of us has to have a bad night." That was the wrong answer. Emily knew it before the kid moved. She could see it in the way his shoulders lifted, in the way his right hand came off the counter edge, not a fist yet, but getting there. She could see it in the way his 2 friends shifted their weight, the way the space between them reorganized itself from a group of loud boys to something with more structure, more intention. "You don't get to tell me what to do," the kid said. "I know people in this town. My father owns half this county. You think your little patches scare anybody?" The old man turned on his stool slowly to face them fully. And for just a moment, one single moment, Emily saw something pass across his face that wasn't patience or resignation. It was something older. Something that had been places these boys had never imagined and come back carrying the weight of those places in its bones. "Boy," he said, his voice dropping to something quieter, "I've been scared by things that would make you cry for your mother. You're not one of them." The first punch came from the one on the left. Not the one doing the talking, the quiet one, the tall one who apparently had decided that words had gone on long enough. He swung hard and caught the old man across the jaw, and the old man went off the stool and hit the floor with a sound that Emily felt in her own chest, like a physical impact. She pushed through the door before she made any decision to do so. Her body went in before her mind caught up. She crossed the diner in 6 steps. She was aware of the waitress making a sound somewhere to her left. She was aware of someone shouting. She was aware that she was small and cold and shaking and wearing a coat held together in 2 places with safety pins, and that none of those facts mattered at all in this moment. She dropped to her knees beside the old man. His hand came up not to push her away, but reflexively protecting his face, expecting another blow. "It's okay," she said. She didn't know why she said it. Nothing about this was okay. "I'm not going to hurt you. Can you hear me?" His eyes found her. Gray eyes, she noticed. Clear, despite everything. "Get out of here, girl," he said. "I'm not leaving you on the floor." "Girl, my name is Emily." She turned around, putting herself between him and the 3 boys. They had stopped moving. The one who'd thrown the punch was staring at her with an expression she'd seen before, the expression of someone confronted with something they didn't plan, for something their mental model of the situation had not included. A homeless girl in a safety-pinned coat, positioning herself as an obstacle. The one in the expensive jacket started laughing. "Are you serious right now?" He looked at his friends. "Look at this. Look at this girl." "Leave him alone," Emily said. Her voice was steady. She noted this with mild surprise somewhere at the back of her mind. Her hands were shaking. Her heart was doing something that seemed medically unsustainable, but her voice was steady. "Leave him alone," she said again. "He hasn't done anything to you. Walk away." "Or what?" The kid in the jacket took a step closer. "What are you going to do, sweetheart? What exactly are you going to do?" The honest answer was nothing. She had nothing. She weighed 110 pounds. She had no phone, no weapon, no one who knew her name in this town. She had absolutely nothing with which to back up the line she was drawing in the middle of this diner floor. But she held the line anyway. "You already hit an old man," she said. "You want to add this to your night. You want to be the kind of person who—" He grabbed her by the arm. Not to hit her, not yet. Just to move her. To physically remove this inconvenient obstacle from his path. But he grabbed her hard, and she pulled back hard, and she must have done it in a way that surprised him because, for a moment, he looked genuinely startled, and then his expression closed down into something much colder. "Let go of me," she said. "You need to move." "I said let go." He threw her. Not a punch. A shove hard sideways with enough force that she hit the counter edge with her shoulder and went down. The pain was immediate and sharp, and she tasted something copper bright at the back of her throat. The old man on the floor made a sound. She couldn't tell if it was her name or just a sound, but it pulled her back upright faster than she'd intended. She got between them again. This time the laughing had stopped. The kid in the jacket was looking at her differently now, not with contempt anymore, with something flatter, more deliberate. "Last chance," he said. "Yeah," she said. "For you." She didn't know where that came from. It came from somewhere below language, below planning, below any rational process. It came from the same place that had walked her into this diner in the first place. The tall one moved first. He grabbed her by both arms and yanked her away from the old man's body, and before she could get her footing back, the one in the jacket hit her across the face with something. His hand the flat of it hard enough to make her vision strobe white for a full second. She didn't go down. She would think about that later, how she didn't go down that first time. She'd taken blows before. She knew how to absorb them, how to not give whoever was hitting her the satisfaction of seeing her fall. She tucked her chin, and she stayed up, and she told herself she was not going to let them at the old man while she was still standing. They were not interested in letting her stay standing. The second blow caught her in the ribs. She doubled forward. The third caught her across the back. She went to her hands and knees on the diner floor, the linoleum cold and sticky under her palms. She could hear someone somewhere screaming, the waitress maybe, or one of the customers, or maybe it was coming from somewhere outside herself, she wasn't entirely sure. She crawled forward. She put herself back over the old man's body. She wrapped her arms around as much of him as she could reach, and she held on, and she didn't know why she was doing this. She didn't know what she thought it was going to accomplish. She only knew that she was not moving. "Hey," the old man said against her ear. His voice was ragged. "Hey, look at me." She turned her head. His gray eyes were right there. "You don't have to do this," he said. "I know," she said. "Then why?" "Because you bought me dinner." Her voice broke on the last word. Just slightly. "Nobody buys somebody dinner and then gets left on a floor. That's not—" She had to stop. Her ribs were screaming. "That's not how it works." He stared at her. The boys behind her were saying something. She couldn't track it anymore. Her attention had narrowed to this man's face, to the effort of holding her position, to breathing through the pain, without making a sound that would satisfy anyone who was trying to break her. And then something shifted in the room. She felt it before she understood it. One of the boys, the tall one, said something to the other two. His voice had changed. Not louder, quieter, which was worse. The particular quiet of someone who has just realized something. She turned her head just enough to see what he was looking at. The old man's leather vest had been pushed aside during the fall. The inner lining was visible now, along with the lower patches on the front panel. She wasn't close enough to read them clearly, but the tall boy was. "Hey," he said. His voice was different now, stripped of everything that had been in it before the performance. The arrogance, the manufactured anger. What was left was just a sound. Small and young, and suddenly aware of itself. "Hey, guys." The kid in the jacket turned. The tall boy pointed at the vest. There was a silence in the diner that had a different quality than any of the silences before it. This was not the silence of shock or hesitation. This was the silence of recognition. The silence of people who have just understood exactly what they have done, and are very rapidly calculating what that understanding means for them. The old man, still on the floor, still with Emily's arms around him, looked up at the three boys. He didn't say anything. He didn't have to. "Let's go," the kid in the jacket said. His voice was flat. "Right now. We're going." "What about right now?" They moved fast. The door swung open hard enough to bang against the frame. Emily heard the truck doors, 3 of them same as before, but different now, different energy, the speed of men who want distance between themselves and a mistake. She didn't let go of the old man. She held on until the sound of the truck engine faded. Then she sat back on her heels and looked at him, and neither of them said anything for a long moment. The waitress was on the phone behind the counter. Emily could hear the word ambulance, but it seemed to be coming from very far away. Her shoulder was bad. Her ribs were bad. She was fairly certain something in her face was wrong from the flat-handed blow, but she couldn't feel it yet, and she chose not to investigate. "Jack," the old man said. She blinked. "What?" "My name is Jack Morgan." He paused. "They call me Grizzly." "Emily Carter." He nodded slowly. His eyes moved across her face, assessing. "You're hurt. You're hurt worse." "I've been hurt worse than this." A pause. "Have you?" She thought about it honestly. "Some of it was worse," she said. "Some of it wasn't." He was quiet for a moment. Then he reached into his vest, moving carefully, deliberately, and pulled out a cell phone. It was old, a flip phone, the kind that barely anyone used anymore. He dialed a number from memory, one he didn't have to look up. He held the phone to his ear. She heard it ring twice. "Frank," Jack said when someone answered. His voice was calm. Completely, unnervingly calm, the voice of a man who had long since made peace with the fact that the world contained chaos and had simply developed very efficient methods for addressing it. "It's Jack. Listen to me carefully. I'm at Patty's Diner on Route 9 in Silver Creek." A pause. "Yeah, I'm going to need you to come." Another pause. "Bring everyone." He closed the phone. He looked at Emily. "Help's coming," he said. She didn't ask who he'd called. She didn't ask what everyone meant. She was 18 years old, and she was sitting on the floor of a diner in Silver Creek, Montana, with broken ribs and blood on her coat, and the only thing she knew with certainty was that somewhere out in the cold night, 3 boys were driving fast and feeling safe. They were wrong to feel safe. But she didn't know that yet. She just sat with Jack Morgan on the floor of Patty's diner, and she held his hand because it seemed like the right thing to do. And outside the window, the town was quiet, and the highway was empty, and the night had absolutely no idea what was coming for it. 43 bottles, she thought absently, irrationally. She'd counted 43 bottles before all this started. She never did find out if there were 50. The ambulance arrived 11 minutes after the waitress made the call. Emily knew because she counted. Counting was something she did when her body was in pain, and her mind needed something to hold on to, something measurable, something that confirmed time was still moving, even when everything inside her wanted to stop. 11 minutes. She counted every one of them, sitting on that floor next to Jack Morgan, her hand still in his. Neither of them talking much, both of them breathing carefully in the way people breathe when certain movements cost too much. The paramedics came through the door fast and went to Jack first, which was correct. He was older and his jaw was swelling into something that didn't look right, and when they touched his ribs, he made a sound that he immediately tried to cover with a cough, which fooled nobody. Emily watched them work on him, and she answered their questions when they turned to her, and she did not mention the pain in her shoulder because she needed both hands free, and she was not ready to let anyone tell her to stop moving. "You need to lie down," one of the paramedics said to her. Young woman professional, the kind of tired that comes from too many shifts and not enough sleep. Her name tag said Rivera. "I'm fine." Rivera looked at her face. "You're not fine." "I've been less fine," Emily said. "Is he going to be okay?" Rivera glanced at Jack, then back at Emily. Something in the paramedic's expression shifted, not quite softness, more like recognition. The recognition of someone who has learned to read people quickly and has just read Emily Carter accurately in about 4 seconds. "We need to get him to the hospital, and we need to get you there too." "I don't have insurance." "That's not my department." "It'll be my department when the bill comes." Rivera crouched down to eye level, which Emily hadn't expected. People in positions of authority didn't usually crouch down to her level. They usually talked over her, passed her around her. "Listen to me. Whatever's going on with your shoulder, and whatever's going on with your ribs, and whatever else happened to you tonight, you need imaging. That's not a negotiation. That's just a fact." A pause. "What's your name?" "Emily." "Emily, I'm Carmen. And I'm telling you straight, the man over there is asking about you every 30 seconds, so you might as well come to the hospital so he can stop asking." Emily looked at Jack. He was on a stretcher now, being stabilized, and sure enough, his head was turned toward her, his gray eyes tracking her across the room with an attention that felt for the first time in a very long time like it meant something. "Fine," Emily said. She let Rivera help her up. The pain when she stood was significant enough that she had to stop and breathe through it for a moment, and Rivera's hand on her arm was steady and didn't comment on any of it, which Emily appreciated more than she could have expressed. The waitress, whose name turned out to be Donna, a woman in her 50s who had clearly been shaken badly, but was holding it together through the specific stoicism of someone who has worked customer service in a small town long enough to have seen a few things, was still on the phone when they went out. Emily heard her say the word police, and then several names she didn't recognize, and then something that sounded like a description of the truck. The cold hit Emily the moment the door opened. It hit her differently than it had an hour ago before all of this. An hour ago, the cold had been her enemy, the thing she was managing, the thing she organized her entire evening around resisting. Now it just felt like information. Her body was occupied with more pressing concerns. She got into the ambulance. She sat where Rivera told her to sit, and as they pulled out of the parking lot onto Route 9, Emily Carter looked out the small rear window of the ambulance at the quiet highway, stretching behind them, at the dark mountains, pressing in on either side of the town, at the absolute stillness of Silver Creek, Montana, at 8 o'clock on a November night. She had no idea the stillness had maybe 20 minutes left. At the hospital, they separated her from Jack. She hadn't expected that to bother her as much as it did. She had known this man for less than 2 hours. She had exchanged maybe 40 words with him before the violence started. She owed him nothing, and he technically owed her nothing. And yet when the nurse led her left and the orderlies took Jack right, she felt the separation as a physical thing, a small tightening in her chest that had nothing to do with her ribs. She told herself it was just the shock wearing off. She sat in the examination bay, and she answered the nurses' questions, and she let them take the x-rays, and she did not cry when they told her 2 ribs were cracked, because she had cracked ribs before, and she knew what that felt like, and she had already made her peace with it somewhere on the floor of Patty's diner. The shoulder was bruised badly, but not separated. The facial impact had given her a cut along her cheekbone that needed 4 stitches, which they administered with a local anesthetic that worked well enough that she barely felt the needle. What she felt instead was the waiting. The specific quality of waiting that happens in hospital examination rooms when you are a homeless teenager with no insurance and no family and no one who is going to come through the door to sit with you. She had been in this kind of waiting before. It had a texture to it, a particular flavor of silence. She was deep inside that silence when the curtain moved. She expected Rivera. She expected a doctor. She expected a social worker. Actually, the hospital would be required to flag her situation, and she'd navigated social workers before knew the questions they asked, knew which answers led where. She did not expect the man who stepped through the curtain. He was maybe 40, powerfully built with a dark beard going gray at the edges, and the kind of eyes that had seen too many things to waste energy pretending otherwise. He was wearing a leather vest. Different patches than Jack's, but the same essential architecture of a man who belonged to something larger than himself and had belonged to it for a long time. He looked at her face, at the stitches, at the hospital gown over her clothes, at the way she was sitting upright, careful not letting herself lean back because leaning back hurt. "Emily Carter," he said. "Who's asking?" "Frank Donovan." He didn't elaborate on what that meant. He didn't need to. Something in the way he said it suggested that in certain contexts, the name was sufficient. "Jack told me about you." She studied him. "How is he?" "Stable. Jaw's not broken, which is lucky. Ribs took a beating. He's been hurt worse." He paused. "He said the same about you." "He's right." Frank Donovan looked at her for a long moment. Not the way the boys at the diner had looked at her, not sizing her up, not deciding what she was worth, or what category to put her in. Something more careful than that. Something more like the look Rivera had given her that 4-second read, except Frank's version had a different quality. Heavier. Like he was doing math, and the math mattered. "He said you put yourself in front of him," Frank said. "I did. He said you stayed there, after they hit you." "I did." "Why?" The question sat in the air between them. Emily had been asked a version of this question already tonight by Jack himself on the floor of the diner, and she'd given him an answer that was true, but incomplete. She thought about giving Frank Donovan the same answer. She thought about giving him a shorter one. She thought about not answering at all. What she said was, because it was the right thing to do. Frank nodded slowly. Like that was the exact answer he'd expected, and the exact answer he needed to hear. "The 3 men who did this," he said. His voice had not changed in volume or tone. It remained perfectly level. "Do you know who they are?" "I didn't recognize them. But the waitress at the diner, Donna, she knew one of them. Called him by his first name. Tyler, I think." Something moved behind Frank's eyes. Brief, controlled. Gone before she could categorize it. "Okay," he said. "What does okay mean?" Emily asked. "It means we'll handle it." "Handle it how?" He looked at her steadily. "Legally," he said, and then with just enough of something in his voice that she couldn't tell if it was irony or absolute sincerity, mostly. She held his gaze. "I don't want anyone else hurt." "Neither do I." "I mean it." "So do I." He said it without defensiveness, which she found more convincing than if he'd argued the point. "Jack speaks highly of you." "He doesn't know me." "He knows what you did. Sometimes that's enough." Frank straightened. He reached into his vest and pulled out a card, plain white, just a phone number, no name, no logo. He set it on the metal tray beside her bed. If anyone in this hospital gives you trouble about paperwork or bills or anything else, you call that number. She looked at the card. I don't have a phone. He reached into a different pocket and set a prepaid cell phone on the tray next to the card. Still in the packaging. She stared at it. I can't accept. It's not charity, he said. It's logistics. He moved toward the curtain. Then he stopped. One more thing. Yeah. In about 15 minutes it's going to get loud outside. Don't be alarmed. He left before she could ask him what that meant. She found out what it meant. Everyone in Silver Creek found out what it meant. It started as a sound at the edge of perception so low and so distant that the first people who noticed it assumed it was thunder. November thunder wasn't unheard of in Montana, though it was unusual, and there was something about this sound that didn't quite match thunder. Thunder rolled and receded. This sound grew. It built on itself, layer by layer, motorcycle engine layered over motorcycle engine. Each individual note joining the collective, until the whole thing was less a sound than a physical force, something you felt in your jaw and your sternum and the base of your spine. Inside the hospital, Emily heard it from her examination bay. She heard a nurse in the hallway say something to a colleague, and the colleague walked to a window, and then a silence that was different from any silence that had come before it. She pulled back the curtain. A nurse at the nurse's station was standing at the window at the end of the hall, not moving, just looking. Emily walked toward her slowly, one hand against the wall for balance, because her ribs were announcing themselves with every step. She reached the window. She looked out at the hospital parking lot and the road beyond it. They were coming down Route 9 in a line that had no visible end. Headlights as far as she could see in both directions. A river of light moving through the dark at a pace that was neither hurried nor casual. The pace of something that knew exactly where it was going and had decided to arrive at a time of its own choosing. The sound by now was everywhere. It had saturated the air. It was inside the building, inside the walls, vibrating in the window glass under her fingertips. The nurse beside her said very quietly, "Lord." Emily didn't say anything. She counted. She couldn't count them all. They were still arriving, still turning into the lot, and the surrounding streets organizing themselves in a way that looked loose but wasn't. She could see that. Even from this distance, even in the dark, the way they filled the available space without crowding it. The way they positioned themselves, facing outward along the perimeter roads, like they'd practiced this, like this was a formation and not an accident. Her phone, the prepaid one still in its packaging that she'd torn open in the examination bay because she'd needed something to do with her hands buzzed. Text message. Unknown number. "We're here. Jack's asking for you. Can you walk?" She typed back, "Yes." The response came in 4 seconds. Room 112. "Someone will come get you." The someone who came was a woman about Emily's age, maybe a year older, wearing a vest of her own dark hair, pulled back, moving through the hospital corridor like she had every right to be there, which apparently she did because none of the staff stopped her. "Emily," she said. "Yeah. I'm Kira, Frank's daughter. Come on." Kira walked fast, and Emily kept up breathing through the rib pain, one hand still against the wall at intervals when the walking got harder. They went through 2 sets of double doors and down a corridor, and then through another door into a wing of the hospital that had suddenly inexplicably acquired the quality of a guarded space. There were 3 men in leather vests positioned at intervals in the hallway, and Emily clocked each one as she passed, and each one nodded to her without speaking, a gesture that felt formal in a way she didn't fully understand yet. Room 112. Jack was propped up in the bed, one side of his jaw wrapped an IV in his left arm, still wearing his vest over the hospital gown, in a way that suggested someone had tried to remove it, and he'd declined. His eyes were open, and they went to her face immediately and stayed there, reading the stitches and the damage the way someone reads a document they're being held responsible for. "Sit down," he said. "You look terrible." "You look worse." "Sit down anyway." She sat in the chair beside his bed. Her ribs thanked her. She didn't thank them back. They find them yet? She asked. Working on it. He shifted carefully. Frank's got people running down every camera between here and the county line. Donna from the diner gave a full description. One of the other customers got a partial plate. Will that be enough? Jack looked at her with an expression that was not quite a smile and not quite something else. It'll be enough, he said. She believed him. She wasn't sure why she believed him, given that she had spent the last several years of her life learning not to believe people when they told her things would work out. But something in the way Jack Morgan said, "It'll be enough," made it land differently. Like it wasn't a prediction. Like it was a statement of intent. You doing okay? He asked. 2 cracked ribs, 4 stitches, bruised shoulder. That's not what I asked. She looked at him. I asked if you're doing okay, he said. The distinction between what she'd answered and what he'd asked sat in the space between them for a moment. She understood the distinction. She just hadn't expected it from him, or from anyone tonight, or honestly from anyone in longer than she could immediately calculate. I don't know yet, she said honestly. He nodded like that was a perfectly acceptable answer. Frank tell you we're covering the hospital? He asked. He implied it. It's covered. All of it. Don't argue with me about it. I wasn't going to argue. He raised an eyebrow slightly. I was going to argue tomorrow, she clarified. Tonight I'm too tired. Something moved in Jack Morgan's gray eyes. She couldn't name it precisely. It was in the neighborhood of something like she didn't have the right word for it. She'd been away from kindness long enough that she'd lost some of the vocabulary. Outside the room down the corridor, someone's radio crackled. Kira appeared in the doorway. Her expression had changed in the 2 minutes since she'd walked Emily here. It had acquired a specific alertness, the alertness of someone who has just received information and is processing its implications. Frank found them, she said. Jack turned his head slowly toward her. Where? Caldwell Ranch, about 12 miles out. Kira paused. Tyler Caldwell, the oldest one. His father owns the place. They think they can wait it out. The room was quiet for a second. How many people does Frank have positioned? Jack asked. As of right now. Kira checked her phone. 340. Emily heard the number and something in her chest shifted. Not fear. She wasn't sure what it was. It was too large for her to immediately categorize. Tell him to add the roadblocks on 9 and on Old Mill, Jack said. Nothing moves in or out of that property without documentation. Already done. And no contact with the family until the deputies arrive. Evidence first, everything else second. Frank said the same thing. Good. Jack settled back against the pillow. He looked suddenly exhausted. Not the exhaustion of a man who wanted to stop, but the exhaustion of a man whose body was submitting a complaint that his mind was still reviewing. He looked at Emily. You understand what's happening? He asked. I think so. Those boys thought running would be enough, thought their name and their daddy's money would be enough. His voice was even, factual. They didn't understand that the moment they left that diner, they were already surrounded. They just couldn't see the walls yet. Emily thought about that. She thought about the 3 of them piling into that truck, slamming those doors, driving fast into the dark, and feeling safe. Feeling like distance was the same thing as consequence-free. She thought about the particular arrogance of people who have always had someone to clean up after them, always had a father, or a name, or a dollar amount standing between their choices and their outcomes. She thought about how that must feel to run and find out the world had gotten there before you. Jack, she said. Yeah. What happens to them? He looked at her carefully. What do you want to happen to them? She thought about it honestly. The honest answer surprised her slightly. I want them to face what they did, she said. In a courtroom, with a record, where it follows them. A pause. I don't want anything extra. Jack was quiet. I know that might not be. It's exactly right, he said. And it's exactly what's going to happen. He held her gaze until she believed him. Then his eyes drifted to the window to somewhere beyond it, and his expression settled into something that looked less like anger and more like the particular gravity of a man who has made decisions. He stands behind, who has paid the price for them over enough decades to have a clear accounting of what things cost and what they're worth. The radio crackled again in the hallway. 340 motorcycles in the dark of Silver Creek, Montana, positioned around a luxury ranch, where 3 young men sat behind locked doors, convinced that wealth was armor. They were about to learn the specific difference between armor and a wall. And Emily Carter sat in a hospital chair with 4 stitches in her cheek, and 2 cracked ribs, and a prepaid phone she'd just learned to use, and she held the hand of a man she'd known for less than 3 hours. And outside the window, the night was full of headlights, and the sound of engines, and the particular rumble of something enormous, deciding how to be patient. She was still counting. She didn't know what she was counting anymore. She just knew she wasn't done. The call came at 9:47 p.m. Emily knew the exact time because she was looking at the prepaid phone in her hand, not for any particular reason, just holding it the way people hold things when their mind is too full to put anything down. The screen lit up with Frank Donovan's number. She recognized it now, had memorized it in the way she memorized things that felt important. And Jack reached for his own phone before she could react, and she watched his face as he listened. He didn't say much. 3 words, maybe 4, across a call that lasted 90 seconds. Then he closed the phone and set it on the blanket beside him and was quiet for a moment, in the way that men who have spent decades making decisions are quiet, not empty, but processing, running something through an internal system that had been refined over too many years to rush now. "What?" Emily said. "Caldwell called the sheriff." She absorbed that. "Okay. Not to report what his son did," Jack said. "To report us. Claimed we were threatening private property. Claimed there was an armed mob surrounding his land." He paused. His word was mob. "What did the sheriff say?" "Sheriff Briggs has been in Silver Creek for 22 years, Jack said. "He knows the difference between a mob and a perimeter." He shifted against the pillow carefully. "He also knows what Frank Donovan's people look like when they're working clean." Which they are. Emily thought about this. Caldwell's trying to flip the story. He's trying to make his boys the victims. Will it work? Jack looked at her with an expression that was almost something like tired amusement. "There are 17 witnesses from Patty's Diner who saw what happened. Donna's already given a statement. The camera above the register caught the whole thing. Frank's people confirmed it with the owner 40 minutes ago." He paused. "And there's you. I'm a homeless teenager with no address and no phone until 2 hours ago." "You're a witness," he said. "And 2 cracked ribs don't lie on an X-ray." She didn't answer immediately. She was doing what she always did when she was thinking hard. She went very still, so still that people sometimes forgot she was in the room, which had been useful to her over the years in ways she didn't particularly enjoy acknowledging. "Jack," she said finally. "Yeah. Have you done this before? This whatever this is. This organized response?" He took a breath, let it out. "Not exactly like this. But something like it." He was quiet for a moment. Not evasive, she'd met evasive. She knew what it felt like, and this wasn't it. This was more like someone choosing precision over speed. "When you belong to something," he said, "and that something is worth belonging to you, show up. That's the whole rule. Everything else is just details." She sat with that. In the hallway she heard footsteps, multiple sets moving with purpose. Kira appeared in the doorway again, and this time there was someone with her. A man in his 50s in uniform, with the deliberate bearing of someone who has learned to enter rooms without escalating them. Sheriff Briggs. He had a notepad in his hand and reading glasses pushed up on his forehead, and the look of a man who had been called in on his night off and had come anyway because that was simply who he was. He looked at Jack first, then at Emily. "Mr. Morgan," he said. "Tom," Jack said. "Hell of a night." "That's one word for it." Briggs looked at Emily. "Ms. Carter, I'm Tom Briggs, County Sheriff. I'd like to take your statement when you're ready. No rush, your medical situation takes priority. Emily looked at him steadily. I'm ready now. He pulled the second chair around and sat, and he opened the notepad, and for the next 35 minutes, Emily told him everything. She told it in order precisely without editorializing in the flat, clear voice she had developed for situations where what mattered was being believed. She had given statements before to social workers, to school administrators, to a police officer once in a group home in Billings, who had eventually done nothing with what she told him. She knew how to do this. What she didn't know was how it felt to give a statement when the information actually had weight behind it. When the person across from her was writing everything down and meant it. When she finished, Briggs looked at his notepad for a moment. Then he looked up. The camera footage from Patty's has been requested, he said. We expect to have it within the hour. Combined with your statement and the other witnesses, we have sufficient grounds for arrest on aggravated assault. He paused. Possibly more depending on what the DA determines about the intentionality. Attempted homicide, Emily said. Briggs met her eyes. That determination belongs to the district attorney. I know. I'm just telling you what it felt like from where I was sitting. He held her gaze. I understand, he said, and something in the way he said it told her he did. He stood, thanked them both, and left. The room felt different after he was gone. Quieter in a specific way, like a held breath partway released. He believed you, Jack said. I know. Does that surprise you? She thought about it honestly. A little, she admitted. Jack said nothing, but the look on his face said enough. Outside in the parking lot and along the surrounding roads, 340 motorcycles were still positioned exactly where Frank Donovan had put them. They had been there for over an hour now. Nobody had moved. Nobody had gotten loud. Nobody had made threats. Nobody had approached the hospital entrance except the members specifically coordinating with Frank. From a distance from the outside, it probably looked like patience. From the inside, from the perspective of anyone who understood what patience like that meant, what kind of discipline it took to hold that many people that still for that long, it looked like something else entirely. It looked like a message written in bodies and engine heat and the specific refusal to leave. Kira came back at 10:23. Emily knew because she was counting again. She'd given up trying to stop. Counting was what her nervous system did when it was managing more input than it had protocols for, and tonight had exceeded every protocol she owned. Frank wants to talk to you, Kira said to Jack. He's outside. Tell him to come in. He said he'd rather you came out. Jack looked at Emily. She could see him calculating the cost, not the physical cost, though that was real, but the other kind, the calculation about what to ask of her and what not to. Go, she said. I'll be back in 10 minutes. Jack, go. He went moving slowly with the help of a hospital cane. They'd found him Kira on one side, without making it look like she was helping. Emily watched the doorway after they were gone, and then she looked at the ceiling, and then she looked at her hands. She had been alone in rooms before. She had been alone in rooms her whole life, essentially, even when other people were technically present. But alone in this particular room, in this particular moment, felt different from all the other alones she had cataloged over 18 years. It felt like the quiet before something that hadn't been named yet. She picked up the prepaid phone. She didn't call anyone. She didn't have anyone to call. She just held it, which was what she'd been doing most of the night. Then it buzzed. Text message. Unknown number. Different, unknown number than before. She opened it. You don't know me. My name is Donna. I work at Patty's. I just wanted you to know I told them everything. Everything I saw. And I'm sorry I didn't do more when it was happening. You were braver than me tonight. I won't forget that. Emily read it twice. She didn't cry. She was not going to cry in a hospital room alone over a text message from a waitress she'd never spoken to directly. She typed back, "Thank you, Donna. You called the ambulance." That mattered. She stared at the response for a moment. Then she typed, "You were brave enough. Nobody's ready for something like that." She sent it. Then she set the phone down and looked at the ceiling again. and she allowed herself approximately 45 seconds of something that wasn't quite crying and wasn't quite not crying. And then she stopped and breathed through it and put it away because she had learned a long time ago that emotions, like most things, needed to be budgeted. Jack came back in 14 minutes, not 10. He came back different. She registered it immediately. She registered everything. Immediately. It was the survival skill. She was most fluent in something, in the way he was moving, the particular set of his jaw, the way his eyes found hers in the doorway, with an intention that had shifted from the intention she'd seen when he left. "What happened?" she said. He sat down in the chair, slowly. "Frank found something," he said. "What kind of something?" Jack was quiet for a moment. And in that moment, Emily had the specific sensation she'd learned to associate with the ground moving under things that had seemed fixed, the sensation of a story she thought she understood, turning out to have more underneath it. "Tyler Caldwell," Jack said. "The one in the expensive jacket, the one doing the talking." "Yeah. He's done this before." The room was very still. "Not with us," Jack said. "Different situation. 6 months ago in Cascade County. A man named Roy Etter, 63 years old, retired, walking his dog outside a gas station. 3 young men picked a fight, beat him badly enough that he spent 8 days in the hospital." He paused. "Roy didn't press charges. His family said he was scared. Said the Caldwell name had reach in that county, and Roy was a quiet man who just wanted to go home and recover and not have more trouble." Emily's hands had gone very still in her lap. "Tyler Caldwell was one of the 3, Jack said. "His father's lawyer had it handled inside 2 weeks. Record clean. Roy Etter still has back problems he'll carry the rest of his life." She looked at Jack. "How did Frank find this?" "Frank knows people who know people." He said it simply, without drama. "And when Frank asks questions, people tend to remember things they'd convinced themselves to forget." "Can Roy Etter testify?" "Frank's people are on the phone with him right now." Jack's voice was even. "A man who didn't press charges 6 months ago because he was afraid might feel differently about it when he finds out he wasn't alone. When he finds out that this time there are consequences. When he finds out there are 340 people who drove from 4 states in under 2 hours because one of their own got hurt, and that those 340 people are not going away until this is done right." Emily thought about Roy Etter. 63 years old. Walking his dog. 8 days in the hospital. She thought about the quiet, specific way that fear worked on people, how it didn't disappear, how it sat in the body and accumulated, how it changed the way you made decisions about what was worth fighting and what was better left alone. She thought about how it felt to suddenly not be alone in that fear anymore. "There's something else," Jack said. She looked at him. Roy said yes. The weight of those 3 words landed in the room and stayed there. Roy Etter, 63 years old, still with back problems, who had convinced himself that quiet was the only option available to him, had picked up the phone tonight when a stranger called and said you weren't alone, and had said yes. Emily pressed her lips together. Hard. "Okay," she said. Her voice came out steady. She was grateful for that. "Okay," Jack agreed. The phone on his blanket buzzed. He looked at it. His expression changed, not dramatically, just a subtle recalibration, the kind that happens when information arrives that changes the geometry of a situation. "Briggs is moving," he said. "Deputies are heading to the Caldwell property now." "How many?" "Enough." He paused. Frank pulled his perimeter back 50 yards to give them clear access. Made sure every member was documented, visible, hands out. Everything clean. Everything on record. He looked at Emily. "Frank's very good at this." "I'm starting to understand that." "He was a logistics officer," Jack said. "Before, different life. But the skill set translates." She almost smiled. It surprised her enough that she noticed it. "What happens when the deputies get there?" she asked. Tyler Caldwell and his 2 friends either come out peacefully, or the evidence, which now includes 2 assault victims, 17 witnesses' camera footage, and a prior victim in another county who is actively cooperating, gets compiled into a package that the district attorney cannot put down. Jack's voice had the particular flatness of someone describing a mathematical certainty. "Caldwell Sr. can make calls. He can get lawyers on the phone at this hour, which he definitely already has. He can try to frame this as harassment, as intimidation, as whatever narrative serves his son." He paused. "What he cannot do is make the evidence disappear, because Frank made sure of that in the first hour." Emily leaned forward slightly. Her ribs protested. She ignored them. "How?" she said. "Every piece of footage, every witness statement, every photograph taken at the scene copies were made and distributed to 7 different people in 4 different locations before the originals even reached the sheriff's office." Jack looked at her levelly. "You can pressure one person. You can pressure a system. You cannot pressure information that already exists in 14 places simultaneously." She sat back. She thought about that, about what it meant to be organized. Really organized, not the chaotic, overwhelming force that the Caldwell family had probably imagined when they first heard the sound of 400 motorcycles, but something more precise than that. Something that understood that power wasn't about volume, it was about irreversibility. Make the truth impossible to erase. That was what Frank Donovan had spent the last 2 hours doing. The phone buzzed again. Jack looked at it. And this time the shift in his expression was larger. Not shock. Jack Morgan did not appear to be a man given easily to shock, but something that landed in the neighborhood of deep satisfaction. The satisfaction of someone who has watched a thing unfold exactly as it needed to. He turned the phone so Emily could see the screen. 1 line of text from Frank. "They're coming out." She read it twice, 3 times. The 2 words did something to the tension in her body that she hadn't been tracking consciously, but now felt releasing vertebra by vertebra, like something that had been wound tight for hours was slowly, carefully being allowed to uncoil. Tyler Caldwell and his 2 friends were coming out of the Caldwell ranch, not because they'd had a change of heart, not because they'd developed a conscience in the last 3 hours. They were coming out because the walls they'd run to the money, the name, the father, the locked doors of a property they thought of as safe, had turned out not to be walls at all. They were coming out because there was nowhere left to go. Emily handed the phone back to Jack. She sat with her hands in her lap, and she breathed carefully around her cracked ribs, and she thought about Roy Eder saying yes. She thought about Donna from the diner typing "You were braver than me" on a phone somewhere in Silver Creek, while her hands were probably still shaking. She thought about how none of this was supposed to happen. Not the dinner, not the violence, not the phone call, not the sound that had descended on this town and changed the quality of its air. She thought about how she'd gone behind Patty's diner tonight to count bottles. 43 bottles. She'd been trying to get to 50. She had ended up somewhere so far past 50 that she couldn't see it from where she was sitting. "Jack," she said. "Yeah. How many people came really? How many?" He checked the phone. Frank had sent an updated count 20 minutes ago. 407, he said. She nodded slowly. She did not ask the question she was actually thinking, which was why. She knew why. She'd heard Jack explain the rule: when you belong to something, and that something is worth belonging to you, show up. That was the whole rule. What she was actually thinking underneath that was something she didn't have clean language for yet. It was in the vicinity of what would it be like to belong to something like that. She had never belonged to anything. She had been placed in things, assigned to things, cycled through things. But belonging, the kind that means people drive through the night from 4 states because you made 1 phone call, that was a category of experience she had no personal data for. She was beginning to understand sitting in this hospital room with cracked ribs and 4 stitches and a prepaid phone that had received a text from a woman who called her brave that she might be about to get some. Outside, she heard a sound. Not the sound of engines. The engines had been there so long they'd become background, become part of the texture of the night, like weather. This was different. This was the sound of engines shutting off. One by one, in a sequence that spread outward from some central point. She couldn't see the motorcycles outside were going quiet. Not leaving, she could tell the difference between the sound of departure and the sound of deliberate stillness. They were stopping. Choosing silence. She didn't know what it meant yet. She would find out. But in this moment, sitting in the specific quiet left behind by 407 engines deciding together to go, still Emily. Carter felt something she had no practiced response for, something her nervous system had no established protocol to handle. She felt safe, not permanently. Not in any way she could bank on or plan around. Just in this moment, in this room, with this man sitting across from her, and that silence settling over Silver Creek like a hand laid gently on the shoulder of a town that had just witnessed something it would be talking about for the rest of its years. Just right now. Just this. It was the most she had ever had of it, and she held it carefully, the way you hold something you've never held before. Not quite sure of the weight, not quite sure of the shape, but absolutely sure. Bone, sure. Blood, sure. The sureness that lives below all the places where doubt usually lives, that you are not going to put it down. The silence lasted exactly 4 minutes. Emily knew because she was still counting. Still doing the thing her nervous system did when the world gave it too much to process at once. 4 minutes of engines gone quiet outside a hospital in Silver Creek, Montana. And then Frank Donovan's voice came through Jack's phone on speaker low, and even the voice of a man reporting facts in the order they occurred. All 3 in custody, Frank said. Deputies have them. Tyler Caldwell Brandon Moss, and a third one goes by Cutter, real name Derek Purcell. All 3 cuffed and in the back of Briggs's vehicles as of 11:14 p.m. Jack exhaled. Just once. Short and controlled. Injuries, he said. None. They came out clean. Caldwell Sr. was on the porch when the deputies arrived, had 2 lawyers on the phone, simultaneously started talking before anyone asked him anything. Briggs let him talk. A pause that contained something dry in it. Briggs is very good at letting people talk themselves into corners. Evidence secured. Everything. Footage from Patty's has confirmed the whole incident, clear angle, good lighting. Donna Fletcher's statement is on record. Roy Etter spoke to the Cascade County DA 30 minutes ago and is prepared to provide a formal statement by morning. Frank paused. There's one more thing. Jack waited. The truck, Frank said. The one they drove. Deputies ran the plates and pulled it into the lot. One of Briggs's officers found something in the back seat. A steel pipe. Still had blood on it. The room went very quiet. Emily looked at her own hands. Whose blood? Jack said, though his voice already knew the answer was going to cost something. Lab'll confirm, Frank said, but the length and weight match what your injuries are consistent with. And Emily's. Another pause. They kept it. They drove away and they kept the pipe in the truck. Emily heard this and understood it the way you understand something that is both worse than what you expected and also exactly what you should have expected from people who had never once in their lives been made to account for what they'd done. They kept it because it had never occurred to them that they would ever need to worry about it. That was the specific arithmetic of impunity. It made people careless because carefulness had never been required of them. That's everything then, Jack said quietly. That's everything, Frank confirmed. Get some rest, both of you. A beat. Tell the girl she did good. Jack looked at Emily. She can hear you, he said into the phone. There was a brief silence on Frank's end. Then, you did good, Emily Carter. She pressed her lips together, breathed through her nose. Thank you, she said. Her voice came out smaller than she intended. Frank hung up. The room settled around them again, and this time the settling had a different quality than before. Not the taut quiet of waiting, but something looser. Something that felt cautiously like the first exhale after a very long time of not being able to fully breathe. Jack leaned his head back against the pillow. He looked tired in a way he hadn't been allowing himself to look for the last several hours. The tiredness of a man in his late 60s who had been beaten with a steel pipe and had then spent the following hours running a coordinated response operation from a hospital bed using a flip phone and 30 years of relationships built on exactly this kind of loyalty. The tiredness was legitimate. It had earned itself. Jack, Emily said. Go to sleep. I'm not sleeping. You're about 40 seconds from it. He opened one eye. I'm resting my eyes. You've been resting your eyes for the last 3 sentences. He almost smiled. The almost smile pulled at his jaw, and he winced. And then he actually smiled anyway, which told her something about him that she filed away without examining too closely right now. There are going to be things that happen tomorrow, he said, eyes still closed. Legal things, statements. The DA's office will probably want to talk to you again. Briggs will want a follow-up. Frank will have questions about the timeline. I know. You don't have to do any of it alone. She looked at him. I mean it, he said. Not one piece of it alone. You understand? She didn't answer immediately. She was doing the thing again, still processing running the statement through whatever internal system she used to evaluate whether things people said to her were true or were just the shape of true. She had gotten very good at telling the difference. I understand, she said. She didn't say whether she believed it yet, but she said she understood, and that was for tonight enough. She fell asleep in the chair. She didn't intend to. She hadn't slept in a chair by choice since a group home in Bozeman 3 years ago, where the beds were infested with something she'd never gotten a clear answer about. But the pain medication Rivera had given her was doing its quiet work, and the warmth of the hospital room after months of cold was a weight she didn't have the resources to resist. And at some point, between one counted minute and the next, she was simply gone. Her head tilted back against the wall. Her arms folded carefully around her ribs, breathing in the slow, even rhythm of someone whose body had finally overridden everything else and insisted. She woke at 6 a.m. to voices in the hallway. Not loud voices. Careful ones, the kind people use when they're trying not to wake someone. She came awake fast. She always came awake fast. It was the other survival skill, the one that lived in the body even when the mind wanted to stay under, and she registered the room, Jack asleep in the bed, gray light coming through the window, and 2 people in the hallway, speaking in the low, deliberate tones of people managing something. She got up. Her ribs reminded her of themselves. She acknowledged them and moved anyway. She opened the door. Kira was in the hallway with a woman Emily hadn't seen before, mid-50s. Sharp eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, wearing a blazer at 6 in the morning, with the energy of someone for whom 6 a.m. was simply a time that existed and contained work. Emily, Kira said without surprise. This is Margaret Osei. She's an attorney. Emily looked at Margaret Osei. Margaret Osei looked back at Emily with the specific assessment of someone whose profession required accurate reading of people under pressure, and whatever she read, she apparently found acceptable because she extended her hand immediately. I've been retained to represent your interests, Margaret said. And Jack's. Frank Donovan asked me to come last night. I drove from Missoula. That's a 2-hour drive. Yes. At night. I'm aware. Margaret's expression was professional and also contained in its edges something that might have been personal. I read your statement on the way here. Sheriff Briggs forwarded it with your permission, which Kira confirmed on your behalf. I hope that's acceptable. Emily thought about it. In her experience, things done on her behalf without her specific prior knowledge had not historically been done in her interest. But Kira was watching her with a straightforwardness that didn't have agenda in it, and Margaret Osei had driven from Missoula at 4 in the morning, and both of those facts were data points she weighed honestly. It's acceptable, she said. Good. Margaret opened a leather portfolio. Here's where we are. The DA's office is filing charges this morning. Aggravated assault, aggravated battery. And based on the evidence package and the prior incident in Cascade County, they're pursuing a pattern of violence enhancement that will significantly affect sentencing. She paused. Roy Etter's statement was received at 5:40 a.m. He was thorough. He was also... She paused in a way that wasn't hesitation, but was instead the pause of someone choosing the right word, angry. In a productive way. The kind of anger that reads very well in a legal document. What does that mean for Tyler Caldwell? It means his father's money and his family's lawyers are going to work very hard for the next several months, Margaret said. And they may achieve some things. Reduced charges on secondary counts possibly. Sentencing negotiations. She met Emily's eyes. What they will not achieve is making this go away. The evidence is too clean and too distributed, and Roy Edder's prior incident creates a documented pattern that no amount of legal maneuvering can fully erase. Emily absorbed this. And me, she said. My testimony. Your testimony is central, Margaret said. You were the primary victim of the secondary assault. Jack was the first target, but the sustained violence directed at you while you were shielding him is documented on camera, corroborated by witnesses, and evidenced by your medical records. She paused. I want to be honest with you. Defense attorneys will attempt to complicate your credibility. Your housing situation, your record in the foster system, your lack of permanent address. They'll try to use all of it. I know, Emily said. And I want to be equally honest that none of it will be sufficient, Margaret said. Because camera footage doesn't have a housing situation. Because Roy Edder is a retired school teacher with 30 years of community standing. Because the combined weight of this evidence is not a thing that credibility attacks can dismantle. She closed the portfolio. I've handled cases like this. I've handled cases much harder than this. I want you to understand clearly that I am here. I am not leaving until this is resolved, and you will not navigate any part of this process without representation. Emily looked at her for a long moment. Who's paying for this? She asked. That's been handled. By Frank. By several people, Margaret said. Frank organized it. He made some calls last night while you were sleeping. People contributed. She said it the way people say things that are true and also incomplete, and Emily recognized the incompleteness but let it go because she was too tired and too sore to dig into it right now, and also because she was beginning to understand that the way these particular people handled things was with a collective efficiency that she didn't yet have the full map of. She would get the map eventually. Right now, she just needed to get through the morning. She went back into the room. Jack was awake, barely his gray eyes open and tracking her from the bed with the patience of someone who has decided that asking questions can wait until after coffee. Attorney's here, Emily said. Margaret. You know her. Frank's used her before. He shifted, winced, settled. She's good. One of the best in the state for this kind of thing. Jack? She sat down. How many people do you know? He considered the question with apparent seriousness. Enough, he said. She almost laughed. The almost laugh hurt her ribs, which prevented it from becoming an actual laugh, which was probably for the best, because she wasn't sure what came after actual laughter right now, and she wasn't ready to find out. At 8 a.m., Briggs came back. He came with a deputy and a tablet showing the footage from Patty's diner, and he walked both of them through it, systematically. Timestamp by timestamp, and Emily watched herself on a grainy overhead angle, walk through the door of that diner, and cross the floor, and kneel down beside Jack, and put herself between him and 3 men, who were larger and angrier and entirely unprepared for the specific stubbornness of someone who had nothing left to protect, except her own understanding of what was right. She watched it the way you watch something that happened to you, but feels like it happened to someone else, with a kind of detached recognition, like reading your own name in a sentence you didn't write. That's sufficient, Briggs said when the relevant section ended. The DA has everything she needs for filing. I want to ask you one more time, Ms. Carter, for the record, if there's anything you want to add to your statement or anything that you feel wasn't captured. No, Emily said. That's everything. Briggs nodded. He looked at the tablet for a moment, then up at her. I've been doing this job for 22 years, he said. I want you to know something. He paused in the way of a man who doesn't make speeches and is currently making one anyway because something has required it of him. What you did in there was the bravest thing I've seen in a long time, and I've seen a lot of things. Emily held his gaze. I just didn't want to walk away, she said. That's what brave is, Briggs said simply. He stood, gathered his deputy, and left. The morning moved in the way that mornings move after crisis, slowly at first, and then with a sudden accumulation of events that compressed time and made hours feel like minutes. Margaret met with the DA's office by phone at 9. The formal charges against Tyler Caldwell, Brandon Moss, and Derek Purcell were filed at 10:17 a.m. Bail hearings were scheduled. Caldwell Sr.'s legal team, which had apparently grown to 4 attorneys overnight, filed a counter-complaint alleging harassment and unlawful assembly, which was reviewed and dismissed before lunch, because Frank Donovan's people had documentation proving every member of the perimeter had been on public roads and had at no point made physical contact with anyone on the Caldwell property. Frank had thought of everything. That kept striking Emily at intervals throughout the morning. The particular comprehensiveness of what Frank Donovan had organized in the hours while she was in pain on a hospital room floor. It wasn't just the numbers. It was the thinking. The layers of protection built around the evidence, around the witnesses, around the legal process itself. Every countermove anticipated. Every escape route for the Caldwell's money and their lawyers had been closed before they'd had time to identify it. She said this to Jack at noon while he was eating soup he complained about and eating anyway. Frank was in the Army, Jack said. Logistics, I told you. You told me the skill set transfers, Emily said. You didn't tell me it transferred quite this completely. You didn't ask. I'm asking now. Jack set down the spoon. He looked at her with the patient attention he always gave her. Questions, the attention that treated her like someone whose questions deserved full answers, which remained surprising enough each time that she still noticed it. Frank lost his brother, Jack said. 12 years ago. Different situation. Kid got jumped, nobody showed up the way they should have. Case got mishandled. Nothing stuck. He paused. Frank swore after that if something happened on his watch it would be airtight. Every piece of evidence, every witness, every legal avenue covered before the other side had time to react. He picked up the spoon again. He's had to use it 4 times in 12 years. Tonight was the cleanest of any of them. Emily thought about Frank's brother, about a case that got mishandled, about the particular way that things that don't get resolved become the engine for things that do. She thought about all the ways that loss could organize itself into something useful. Jack, she said. Yeah. What happens to me after this legally, I mean? The medical bills, housing. She said it the way she said things she needed to say, but had practiced not caring about flat direct without the weight of wanting showing through. I have nothing. I had nothing before tonight, and I still have nothing. The charges, the testimony, all of it that's handled. But afterward, I know, he said. I'm not asking for. I'm not expecting. Emily. His voice was quiet, not cutting her off exactly, just grounding the sentence before it could go somewhere she'd regret. I know what you're not asking for. You've been not asking for things your whole life. You've had to. He set the soup aside entirely. I'm telling you not as a transaction, not as a debt, not as charity. As a fact. You are not going back to that parking lot. She looked at him. I have a house, he said, in Billings. 3 bedrooms, one of which has been a storage room for 8 years because I kept telling myself I'd deal with it. I'm telling you right now I'm going to deal with it. He met her eyes steadily. That's not a pity offer. That's not a kindness offer. That's a practical offer from a man who has more space than he uses, and a guest room that owes someone a decent night's sleep. She didn't answer immediately. There will be terms, he said, which is to say, no terms. Just someone in the kitchen sometimes. Someone to argue with about whether the soup is as bad as I say it is. It is that bad, she said. Her voice came out with something in it she hadn't planned. See, he said, you'd be useful. She looked at her hands. She thought about the thing she always did with offers, the way she turned them over. Looking for the cost, the hidden requirement, the thing that would eventually be used against her. She thought about how many times she'd been right to do that, and how the number was high enough to justify the habit. She turned this offer over. She turned it over again. She couldn't find the cost. She looked and she looked with every tool she had, every skill honed by years of needing to read people accurately for her own survival, and what she found instead of a cost was something she didn't have a practiced response for. She found it was just true. Just a man with a storage room he'd been avoiding for 8 years, making a practical offer to someone whose ribs were cracked and whose coat was held together with safety pins, and who had spent the night protecting him from a steel pipe. Just that. Just true. "Okay," she said. It came out quieter than she meant it to. "Okay," Jack said. Neither of them said anything else for a while. At 2 p.m., Kira came in with food that was better than hospital soup sandwiches, from a place down the road, 3 of them, more than either of them needed, which Emily understood was intentional, without it needing to be said. She ate half of one, and then ate the other half, because her body was making demands that overrode her usual reluctance to accept things. At 3 p.m., Frank came in person. He filled the doorway, the way big men fill doorways, not aggressively, just completely, just as a fact of physics. He looked at Jack first, and then at Emily, and his expression was the expression she was beginning to recognize as his default setting, assessing quiet carrying things. "Charges are filed," he said. "We know," Jack said. "Bail hearings tomorrow morning." Given the prior incident and the flight risk argument Margaret's making, the DA is pushing for significant bail. He paused. Caldwell Sr. already tried to call 3 county commissioners this morning. "Did it work?" Emily asked. Frank looked at her. Something in his expression shifted barely, almost imperceptibly, in the direction of respect. "No," he said. "Margaret anticipated it. Filed a motion this morning about undue influence. It's on the record now. Every call Caldwell Sr. makes to a public official from here forward is being tracked." "He's still going to try," Emily said. "He is," Frank said. "And he'll find that everything he tries lands in a place where it becomes evidence of something else." He said it with a flatness that contained, she thought, a certain amount of satisfaction. The satisfaction of a man who had spent years building a system specifically so that this kind of money, this kind of reach, would find itself arriving at doors that didn't open. He crossed to the chair beside the bed, not the one Emily had been in, the one on the other side, and he sat, which surprised her. Frank Donovan did not, in her limited experience of him, seem like a man who sat easily in hospital rooms. He looked at Emily directly. "I want to ask you something," he said. "Okay. And I want you to tell me the truth, not the answer you think I want." "Okay," she said again more carefully. "Are you scared?" She held his gaze. She turned the question over honestly. "Of the trial," she said. "No, of the lawyers." She thought about it. "A little. Not because I think I'm wrong. Because I've watched systems fail people before, and I know they can." She paused. "Of going back to the street, no. I've done that. I can do it again if I have to." She stopped. "What I'm scared of," she said, and this part cost her something to say out loud, "is that this is temporary, that I'll wake up somewhere down the line and all of this." She gestured in a way that meant the room and Jack and Margaret and Kira, and 340 motorcycles and Roy Edder's yes and Donna's text message, and all of it, will have been a thing that happened and then stopped. Frank Donovan looked at her for a long moment. "That's the right thing to be scared of," he said, "because it means you understand what you have." She waited. "What I can tell you," he said, "is that the people in this room, and the people outside this room, and the people who drove here from 4 states last night, they didn't come because it was convenient. They came because Jack made a call. And Jack makes a call once every several years, and when he does, everyone comes. Because that is what this is. That is what it has always been." He leaned forward slightly. "You are the reason he made the call this time. You understand what that means." She didn't. Not fully. Not yet. "It means you're in it now," Frank said simply. "The temporary part is already over." Outside the window, the motorcycles were gone from the parking lot. The town had returned to its surface. Silver Creek looked from a window like a small mountain town on a Thursday afternoon in November, ordinary and cold and unremarkable. But nothing was the same as it had been 20 hours ago, and everyone who lived there knew it, and the knowledge was going to sit in this town for a very long time, the knowledge of what had come in the night and why it had come and what had happened when it did. Emily Carter sat in a hospital room in Silver Creek, Montana, with cracked ribs and 4 stitches and a prepaid phone with 3 new contacts in it. Frank, Kira, Margaret. And she thought about temporary and what the opposite of it was. She thought about Roy Eder saying yes. She thought about Jack's storage room. She thought about what it meant to be in something, really in it. The kind of in it that drove 2 hours in the middle of the night and didn't explain itself and just said here and meant it. She counted the contacts in her phone. 3. 3 days ago she had none. She was beginning to understand that counting was not always about bottles. They discharged Jack on Friday morning, 2 days after the night at Patty's Diner. 2 days after the steel pipe and the frozen pavement and the phone call that had shaken Silver Creek down to its foundations. Jack Morgan walked out of Silver Creek Regional Hospital under his own power, moving carefully, refusing the wheelchair the orderly offered with a politeness that left no room for argument. His jaw was wrapped, 3 ribs taped. His left hand had a brace on it that he kept looking at with the expression of a man who found the brace personally offensive and was working up to telling it so. Emily walked beside him. Her own ribs were taped under her shirt, the stitches on her cheek covered with a bandage that the nurse had changed that morning with hands so gentle Emily had to look at the wall. She was wearing a jacket that wasn't hers. Kira had brought it the previous afternoon. Dark green, heavy lined with something warm, and had set it on the chair without comment. The way you set things down, when you know the other person won't accept them if you hold them out directly. Emily had put it on without comment for the same reason. The cold hit them both at the door. Jack breathed it in like it was something he'd earned. Emily pulled the green jacket tighter and kept walking. Frank's truck was in the lot. Frank himself was leaning against the driver's side with the particular stillness of a man who has been waiting long enough that he's given up pretending he wasn't waiting. He looked at Jack first, the assessment of someone checking a person they care about against the last version they saw, and then at Emily, and whatever calculation he ran came back satisfactory because he just opened the door and said, "Get in before you both freeze." They got in. Nobody said much on the drive out of Silver Creek. The town passed by the windows in the way small towns pass, when you are leaving them incrementally. The gas station, the pharmacy, the diner on Route 9, with its parking lot empty in the early morning, just a building now, just a place that served coffee and eggs and had one camera above the register that had changed the trajectory of 3 people's lives in either direction. Emily looked at Patty's Diner as they passed it. She thought about 43 bottles. She turned back to the windshield and didn't look again. Frank drove them to a motel on the edge of town that the club had been using, a block of 12 rooms, most of them still occupied by members who hadn't yet made the drive back, the parking lot half full of bikes even now 2 days later. He pulled up to room 7 and handed Jack a key. "Margaret's coming at 10, Frank said. "She wants to go over testimony prep. After that, Briggs needs you both for a formal recorded statement, different from what you gave in the hospital, more structured. DA's office wants it clean and complete before the bail hearing this afternoon." "What time's the hearing?" Jack asked. 2 p.m. "You don't need to be there. Margaret will be there. Roy Eder is driving up from Cascade County." Frank paused. "He asked if he could meet you," he said, looking at Emily. Emily specifically. He said, a pause in which Frank appeared to be deciding whether to repeat the exact words. He decided. "He said he wanted to thank the girl who finished what he couldn't." Emily sat with that for a moment. Roy Eder, the retired school teacher with the back problems, the man who had said yes at 5:40 in the morning to a stranger on the phone because someone had told him he wasn't alone. "I want to meet him too," she said. Frank nodded. He got out of the truck, came around, and opened the door on her side, not because she couldn't open it herself, not as a statement of anything, just because his hands were free, and the door was there, the simple functional kindness of someone whose instinct was to do the available useful thing. She stepped out. "Frank," she said. He looked at her. "What happened to your brother?" she said. "The case that didn't stick." He was quiet for a moment. Not surprised, she got the impression Frank Donovan was not easily surprised, but quiet in the way people go quiet when something they carry gets named out loud unexpectedly. His name was Danny, Frank said. He was 26. Wrong place, wrong night, wrong people. We did everything right after. Called it in, cooperated, provided everything they asked for. His jaw tightened just slightly. The DA at the time decided the witnesses weren't reliable. The evidence wasn't handled right. The lawyers for the other side were better than ours. He stopped. Danny went home with cracked ribs and a broken orbital socket and the understanding that the system had looked at what happened to him and decided it wasn't worth the effort. Emily held his gaze. He's okay now, Frank said. He's in Phoenix, has kids, coaches Little League. He paused. But he never fully... He stopped again, chose different words. Some things leave marks that the healing doesn't erase. You just learn to live alongside them. I know, Emily said. I know you know, he said. They looked at each other in the cold parking lot, and something passed between them that didn't need to be named, the specific recognition that happens between people who have carried versions of the same weight in different shapes, who have learned the particular skill of continuing anyway. Frank went to his own room. Emily and Jack went into room 7. Margaret arrived at 10 sharp leather portfolio wire-rimmed glasses blazer, the energy of someone for whom 10 a.m. was already the middle of a working day. She sat across from both of them at the small table by the window, and she walked them through the testimony process with the systematic clarity of someone who had done this enough times to know exactly where things went wrong and was already preventing it. The defense will focus on 3 things, she said. Emily's credibility as a witness due to her housing situation. The nature of the relationship between Emily and Jack. They'll try to suggest you knew each other before, that there's a fabricated or exaggerated narrative here. And they'll attempt to frame the club's response as intimidation that tainted the evidence collection. All 3 of those fail, Jack said. All 3 of those fail, Margaret confirmed. The camera footage predates any possibility of fabrication. Roy Etter's prior incident establishes pattern without any connection to either of you. And Frank's documentation of the perimeter, the timing, the positioning, the absence of any physical contact with the Caldwell property is frankly more thorough than what most law enforcement agencies produce. She looked at Emily. What I want you to understand is that you are not going to be destroyed on the stand. You are going to be challenged. You are going to sit in a chair while someone who is paid to make you look unreliable asks you questions designed to make you angry or confused or contradictory. And you are going to do what you did in that diner. What did I do in that diner? Emily said. You held your position, Margaret said. You held it when it cost you. You're going to do the same thing in a courtroom, and the jury is going to see the same thing. The camera saw someone who does not move from what is true. Emily looked at the table. She thought about the diner floor, about the cold linoleum, about choosing not to let go. Okay, she said. One more thing, Margaret said. She reached into the portfolio and pulled out a single sheet of paper, slid it across the table to Emily. This is a letter from the Montana Department of Health and Human Services. It came to my office this morning, forwarded from the hospital. It's a notification that a formal review has been opened into your last foster placement, specifically the circumstances of your departure. Emily stared at the paper. Someone filed a complaint, Margaret said carefully. On your behalf. An anonymous complaint, very detailed, 3 weeks ago, before any of this happened. Emily looked up. Who filed it? Margaret held her gaze evenly. Anonymously means I don't know, she said, which was, Emily noted, not quite the same as saying she didn't know. She looked at the paper again. 3 weeks ago, before the diner, before Jack, before any of this. Someone had filed a complaint about what happened to her in that last placement, the placement she had walked away from at 16, because the alternative was something she didn't let herself think about directly, even now. Someone had known. Someone had filed it. Someone had been paying attention before anyone else was paying attention. Her hands were not shaking. She made a deliberate decision about that. What does the review mean? She said. Her voice was level. It means an investigation, Margaret said. into the placement, into the people who were responsible. It means that whatever happened there may have consequences for other children who are currently in that system. She paused. It means you weren't only protecting yourself when you left. Emily sat with that for a long time. Jack didn't say anything. He was watching her the way he watched her when something important was happening, with full attention, without commentary, giving whatever was moving through her the space it needed. She folded the letter carefully, put it in the pocket of the green jacket. "Okay," she said again. The word was doing a lot of work this morning. She let it. The bail hearing at 2 p.m. was something Emily only heard about after the fact, through Margaret's phone call at 3:15. Bail was set high. High enough that Caldwell Sr., who had arrived at the hearing with 4 lawyers and the expression of a man who had never lost anything he wanted to keep, had gone pale when the judge read the number. Not because he couldn't cover it, he could. But the number was a message, and the message was received. Tyler Caldwell. Brandon Moss and Derek Purcell were out on bail by 5 p.m., which was when Roy Eder arrived at the motel. He drove himself. 2-hour drive from Cascade County, as Frank had said, and he drove himself in a truck with a bumper sticker from the school where he'd taught for 28 years and a St. Christopher medal hanging from the rearview mirror. He was 63 years old, and he moved with the particular careful gait of someone whose back had been reorganized by someone else's violence and had never fully forgiven the reorganization. He knocked on room 7's door at 5:20. Emily opened it. Roy Eder looked at her face, the bandage on her cheek, the way she was standing with the slight protective lean that people adopt when their ribs are taped, and his expression did something complicated. Not pity, something older and heavier and more specific than pity. "Emily Carter," he said. "Roy Eder," she said. He extended his hand. She shook it. His grip was firm in the deliberate way of someone who had decided that his hands were going to be steady for this, regardless of what they wanted to do. "Thank you for coming," she said. "Thank you for making it matter to come," he said. She stepped back. He came in. Jack was on the bed, jacket off, moving with the careful economy of a man managing his taped ribs, and he looked at Roy, and Roy looked at him, and they exchanged the nod of 2 men who have shared a category of experience without having met before. Roy sat in the chair. Emily sat across from him. Jack stayed on the bed, present but quiet, giving the room to them. 6 months, Roy said. 6 months I told myself it was over. Told myself there was nothing to be done. That the Caldwell name was bigger than what happened to me. He looked at his hands. My wife wanted me to fight it. My daughter wanted me to fight it. I told them I was protecting them, protecting us from more trouble. He paused. I was protecting my fear. That's what I was actually doing. I understand that, Emily said. I know you do, he said. That's partly why I'm here. He looked up at her. When that man called me Frank's person and told me what happened to you, what you did, a girl who weighs, he stopped, recalculated, considerably less than those 3 boys, putting herself between them and an old man she'd just met. He stopped again. I thought about myself 6 months ago, walking my dog, minding my own business, and I thought if that girl can stay on the floor of a diner and not let go, I can pick up a phone and say yes. Emily looked at him. You don't have to thank me, she said. You did the hard part. You were the one who had to relive it. You gave me somewhere to put it, he said simply. That's not nothing. They sat in the specific quiet of people who have been through different versions of the same thing and recognized the shape of each other's version without needing the full story. How's your back? She asked. He laughed. It was short and slightly surprised and entirely genuine. Terrible, he said. Has been for 6 months. Doctor says it's going to be terrible for the foreseeable future. He paused. Worth it, though, to be here, to have said yes. He looked at her steadily. Worth it completely. The next 3 months moved the way consequential things move, not fast, not slow, but with a weight that made each week feel significant. Each development feel like it was building towards something that had been in the architecture all along, waiting for the right sequence of events to make it visible. Tyler Caldwell's legal team filed 4 motions in the first month. Margaret countered every one. Roy Etter's formal statement, delivered in a deposition that took 4 hours, and in which Roy did not look away from the camera once, was entered into the record and became, in Margaret's words, the spine of the prosecution's pattern argument. Emily gave her formal deposition in December in a conference room in Missoula, with Margaret beside her and a court reporter across the table, and one of the Caldwell lawyers doing exactly what Margaret had predicted, asking questions designed to make her angry or confused or contradictory. She held her position. For 4 hours she held it. She answered every question directly. She did not apologize for her housing situation. She did not apologize for her history in the foster system. She did not allow herself to be made smaller by the framing of the questions, and when the lawyer tried a particularly sharp redirect about her credibility, she looked at him with the steady gray clarity of someone who had been on a cold floor with broken ribs and made a choice, and she said, "I know what I saw. I know what I did. The camera agrees with me on both." He moved on. In January, Caldwell Sr. stopped making calls to county commissioners. Margaret's motion had done its work. Every call was now on record, every contact documented. And the picture it was building was not one that served his son's case. He stopped making calls, and he stopped giving interviews, and he went quiet in the way that powerful men go quiet, when they realize the machinery they have always relied on has encountered something it cannot process. In February, Tyler Caldwell's lawyers approached the DA with a plea offer. The DA rejected it. They came back with a better one. The DA rejected that one too. On the 14th of February, which Emily would always find grimly funny. In retrospect, the specific date of it. Tyler Caldwell, Brandon Moss, and Derek Purcell entered guilty pleas to aggravated assault with a pattern of violence enhancement. Caldwell received 4 years. Moss and Purcell received 3 each. The sentences were not the maximum possible. They were not nothing. Margaret called Emily at 11 a.m. with the news. Emily was in Billings when the call came. She had been in Billings since December in Jack's house in the storage room that Jack had cleared out over 2 weekends, with the focused energy of a man completing overdue business. The room had a window that faced east, and a bed that was the most comfortable thing Emily Carter had ever slept in, which she understood was not an objectively high bar, but which felt every morning when she woke up in it like a specific and daily gift. 4 years, Margaret said. Is that enough? Emily asked. A pause. It's a record, Margaret said. It follows them. It's in every background check, every professional application, every moment someone runs their name for the rest of their lives. Another pause. And the pattern enhancement means it informs any future incident. They do this again, the previous conviction becomes a foundation. The next sentence is built on top of this one. Roy knows. Roy cried, Margaret said. And in her voice, underneath the professional precision, was something that suggested she had also cried or come very close to it, and had dealt with that privately in whatever way Margaret Osei dealt with things. Emily stood at the window in the east-facing room in Jack's house in Billings, and she looked out at the February morning, and she felt the news move through her, not like an explosion, not like she'd imagined, but like something settling, like furniture finding its place in a room after being moved around too many times. "Thank you," she said, "for everything." "Don't thank me," Margaret said. "Thank whoever filed that anonymous complaint 3 months before all of this, because that investigation has now expanded. The placement agency is under formal review. 2 other former placements have come forward." She paused. "Whatever you did to survive that system, Emily, you didn't do it without someone eventually noticing." Emily pressed her palm flat against the window glass. She still didn't know who had filed the complaint. She had her suspicions. She kept them to herself. Jack was in the kitchen when she came downstairs. He was making coffee badly, the way he always made it, too strong, too hot, in a pot that had seen better decades, and he looked up when she came in and read her face the way he'd been reading her face for 3 months, the fluency of someone who had paid close attention. "Well," he said. "Guilty pleas," she said. "All 3. Caldwell gets 4 years. He was quiet for a moment. "Roy," he said. "Cried," she said. Jack turned back to the coffee. His shoulders moved in a way that she had learned to read as the thing he did, instead of showing what he felt, when what he felt was too large for the kitchen. "Jack," she said. "Yeah." "I enrolled yesterday." He turned around. "Community college," she said. "Pre-nursing program. Starts in March." She met his eyes. "I've been thinking about it since for a while. Since Margaret said something in the hospital about the foster system review. About other kids." She paused. "People who fall through. People who need someone to show up in a room and know what they're doing and not look at them like a problem to be processed." She paused again. "I want to be that." Jack Morgan looked at her across his kitchen in his house in Billings, Montana in February, with coffee going badly in the pot behind him, and winter light coming through the window, and 3 months of a storage room turned into a bedroom. Between them and his gray eyes, did the thing she'd seen them do exactly twice before, on the floor of Patty's diner, and in the hospital room, when she'd said okay to his offer. They went full. Not tears. Not quite. Just full in the way eyes go when something lands exactly where it was always meant to land, in the place that had been waiting for it. "Good," he said. His voice was steady. "That's good, Emily." She nodded. She poured herself a cup of the terrible coffee, and she sat at his kitchen table, and she thought about Roy Etter coaching his grandkids at a park in Cascade County, finally sleeping without the weight of unresolved things on his chest. She thought about Donna from the diner, who had texted twice since November, once on Thanksgiving, once on Christmas, both times just to check in, both times using Emily's name, like it was something she'd decided mattered. She thought about Frank Donovan, in whatever city he was in today, doing whatever Frank did between one crisis and the next, carrying Danny in Phoenix alongside everything else he carried. She thought about Kira, who had sent her the name of a counselor in Billings who specialized in foster system survivors, and who had texted 2 weeks later just to ask if Emily had made the call, and Emily had said yes, because she had made the call, because it turned out that when someone followed up without pressure, just with the steady presence of someone who meant it, the thing you'd been avoiding became approachable. She thought about a parking lot in Silver Creek, and 43 bottles, and the specific arithmetic of a night that was supposed to be like every other night, and turned out to be the last night of a particular chapter. She thought about what it meant to belong to something, not to be placed in it, not to be assigned to it, to belong to it, the kind that drove through the night from 4 states, and didn't explain itself, and just arrived, and said here, and meant it, the way geography means it, the way weather means it, the way some facts about the world mean it completely, without condition, without an expiration date you could find by looking hard enough. She picked up the terrible coffee. She drank it. It was exactly as bad as always. "This is genuinely awful," she said. "I've been making it this way for 30 years, Jack said. "That's not a defense." "It's a commitment," he said. She looked at him across the table. This man she had known for 3 months, and in some ways had known for much longer, the way you know things that were always going to be true about your life before you encounter the specific form they arrive in. This man with his gray eyes and his patched vest and his storage room and his terrible coffee and his one phone call that had moved 407 people through the dark. She thought about what she was going to say to him. She thought about whether it needed to be said at all, or whether some things are true in the way furniture is true. Solid present, not requiring announcement. She decided it needed to be said. "Thank you," she said. "For dinner. That first night. Before everything." He looked at her. "You were hungry," he said simply. "I know," she said. "But you didn't have to notice." He was quiet for a moment. "That's the whole thing, isn't it?" he said. "Noticing. Most people who walk past someone don't do it because they're cruel. They do it because they've decided not to notice." He set his cup down. "I noticed." "You noticed," she said. "And you stayed," he said. "And I stayed," she said. They sat with that for a moment, the full weight of it, the simple and enormous fact of a dinner, bought a kindness, offered a girl who decided not to walk away, And everything that had grown from those two small decisions, the way forests grow from things that barely look like seeds. Emily Carter was 18 years old. She had cracked ribs healing inside her and 4 stitches coming out next week, and a foster system complaint that had opened into an investigation that would protect children she would never meet. She had a room with an east-facing window and a pre-nursing enrollment confirmation on her phone, and a counselor she was seeing on Thursdays. She had Roy Edder's number saved under R. Donna's saved under D. Margaret's under M. Frank's, under F. Kira's under K. She had people who would answer. She had learned was still learning would spend years learning what it meant to be the kind of person who stayed, who held position when it cost something, who put their body between harm and someone who couldn't protect themselves and simply refused to let go. She had learned that bravery was not the absence of fear. She had been terrified every second of that night in Patty's diner. She had been terrified in the hospital, in the deposition room, in the phone calls, and the legal motions, and the February morning when the guilty pleas landed, and she had to decide what to do with the weight of a thing being finished. She had been terrified. She had stayed anyway. And that? Not the 400 motorcycles, not the arrests, not the sentences, not the system finally doing the thing it was supposed to do that was the thing that had changed her life. Not the cavalry arriving, not the reinforcements, not the moment the powerful were held accountable by the more powerful. The moment she stepped in front of an old man on a diner floor and said, "Don't you touch him," with shaking hands and no backup and nothing but the stubborn, unkillable knowledge that it was right. That was the moment. Everything else was what brave becomes when you let it. When you choose not to walk away.